Greetings and welcome to Liminal Light, a show that explores the languages of myth and star, earth, sky, tongue, and spirit through weekly astrological forecasts. I'm your host, Chris. Enjoy. Here we are between two eclipses. January 31st total lunar eclipse on the North Node in Leo, which was visible for most of the Pacific Ocean, and February 15th partial solar eclipse on the South Node in Aquarius, which will be witnessed in half the world, everywhere except the Americas. Aspects between other planets are separating and applying over the course of the week, but nothing perfects and no planets shift signs beside the Moon until Venus's ingress into Pisces at 8 p.m. EST on the 10th. This puts her into exaltation and is certainly a topic of discussion, but more for next week. Mercury speeds up into combustion on Sunday the 4th, sending logic and language focus into the interior of our minds and deeper selves, switching into the second decan of Aquarius on the 6th, a phase which he rules by both descending and triplicity orders, where he is adept at connecting the fringe and frontiers of thought and ideas to the central intellect, communicating between the most experimental, innovative thinking and the most common, accepted, or utilitarian. The Sun is there with him, making this area of focus until he switches to the third decan on the 9th, joining Venus, where our vision and sense of beauty attempt to untangle the mess of tripwires that have been run from new and emerging identities and aesthetics to those molded firmly from before. Conceptions of bodies and personality roles have surely shifted. Now we must integrate the newly realized sense of beauty and identity in a karmically sound way rather than a politically pre-prescribed. Jupiter is still digging up opportunities to grow in the mire of depravity, while Mars scans the activity from nearby and pounces upon whatever Jupiter pulls up, seizing it and running away with it, where he can fashion it for his own purposes. This can be for the sake of good or bad, and if either, it makes little difference. Both are overeager to a fault, but hopefully how it sorts out in the end reflects a positive outcome, as long as we keep our heads together as we go and contextualize reality firmly first before we use every new piece of unsavory information as a green light to push our personal campaign. Meanwhile, Saturn is just getting started testing our foundations and strategies, and perhaps this reality check is what we need in our state of frenzy, as information is being pulled from out of dark corners in Aquarius, the slimiest things we find seen as worth making good of past pain by Jupiter, and Mars amped on racing towards targets, whatever they may be. Saturn demands we check our work before we submit our statements. This applies both personally and on world scales. The crossfire coming from every camp at all sides, but the Earth as old fortress is impervious to our bullets. To her, the scratches we make upon the rocks are nothing compared to tectonic shifts and glacial gouge. Back to the drawing board we must all go, and take what we now know and make a new plan. Otherwise, it's worth looking more closely at the eclipses in general. What we call the ecliptic in astrology is the apparent path of the Sun in the sky from the Earth's perspective. This intersects the celestial equator and sets the band of the zodiac, with which we track the motion of the planets through the divided fields of meaning, rooting the zodiacal cycle to the solstice points and thus the seasons we experience throughout the year. The path of the Moon's orbit is oval and turned in relation to the Sun, so normally we find the Moon traveling either above or below the Sun's path. The points on either ends of these two intersecting bands are the nodes, and when a lunation occurs on or very near a node or point of intersection, we experience a total or partial eclipse. The North Node is the point where the Moon's path rises above that of the Sun's, and the South Node is where the Moon's path descends below that of the Sun's. Eclipses occur in sets of two about every 6 months, occurring in a pair of signs for about a year and a half at a time. An entire rotation around the zodiac takes about 18.5 years, and it also takes 18.5 months for the nodes to transit through a pair of signs. In nature, the glyph on the nodes can be found in the hood of a cobra, oriented to the viewer as the north node if the snake is moving toward you, and oriented as the south node if the snake is moving away from you. Here we glimpse the head and tail of the serpent mentioned in multiple traditions of astrological mythology. Coincidentally, the smallest species of cobra averages 18.5 centimeters in length, as the largest, the king cobra, averages 18.5 feet. The easiest way to approach the significance of the north and south nodes is through first considering the episodes of creation in Vedic traditions, where the gods, or devas, and the demons, or asuras, take the chthonic snake Vasuki, the primary deity of the netherworld regions known as Patala, and wrap it around Mandara Mountain, which was seated on the back of the giant tortoise in the great sea of celestial milk. This sea was a manifestation of Mother, the primordial creator goddess, or Shakti, and can be thought of as the original void, or before times, or the quantum foam that exists at the smallest level of physical existence at all times, the perpetual yet manifest from which phenomenal reality unfolds. The devas and asuras pulled Vasuki back and forth, spinning the mountain and churning the seas to ensure continual creation. The churning formed solid objects out of the amorphous ocean, motion forming matter out of creation. The spiritual nectar of immortality, or Amrita, also resulted from the churning and was collected in a holy receptacle called the Corum. After they were satisfied with their work, they released Vasuki, who became thirsty for the Amrita and began drinking it. Vishnu, the preserver, noticed the theft and hurled his discus at the serpent, splitting it in two, but not killing it because it had already become immortal from the nectar. The devas banished the two ends of the serpent to opposite ends of the ocean, so they could not come back together and steal the Amrita again. The head became known as Rahu and the tail Ketu. Other tales from the Vedas and the Brahmanas tell of forms of Vasuki, as well as Rahu and Ketu, attempting to swallow or attack the sun and moon, and then being thwarted by either Indra or other heroic deities and retinue, describing the temporary blotting out or reddening of the luminary planets. In Indian astrology, the planets are called grahas, which shares an Indo-European root with the word grab, displaying how the planets have a pull over us and the affairs here on Earth. In this name, the planet we see how they are considered more for their effects rather than their compositions, what they do rather than what they are. Similarly, in Western traditions' Neoplatonic model of the universe, they were spheres of influence descending down to Earth and us rather than orbital spherical bodies. The nodes were referred to as Chayagrahas, or the pull of shadows, as Rahu and Ketu have incomplete bodies and the nodes themselves have no physical forms. They exist as great potential shadows, visible expressions of the chthonic itself, bastions of the underworld and agents of the void that even hold power over the sun and moon, which we can see with our own eyes. Seeing and not seeing are major themes of both the nodes and the luminaries themselves. The sun rules our intellects and our vision of the world, what is authentic and actual under the light. When we understand, we say, I see. The moon rules over the other light, that of imagination, stream of consciousness and emotion. In the moonlight, things appear in multiple ways, evoking in us many images of beauty and even fear. We say, I feel I should do this, when we see with the moon. As the composition of the universe corresponds to the composition of our bodies, the sun and moon are also our actual right and left eyes. As the head of the dragon, Rahu is hungry and restless, and where the north node hits the zodiac in transit is where we are being pulled into greater identification with matter and the material reality, where we strive and reach for in life, and are drawn to experience our dharma. Since Rahu has no body or no receptacle for what he consumes, he remains always hungry for more material and is never satisfied. Ketu, having no head, no mouth or eyes or nose, experiences no hunger, but only disgust. He is the body, the receptacle, and thusly the conduit for creation to occur and creative energy to pass through. He retracts from physical life, feeling already full, has no desires, and is drawn into asceticism and abstinence. In ourselves, the devas are spirit and the asuras are body, pulling us back and forth from polarity to polarity, and the balance of Rahu and Ketu is the axis of this pull that churns the ocean and makes reality manifest. Time and space where reality occurs around us. The mountain is the spinal column, the Amrita are consciousness, the sun and moon are eyes, and it is Rahu and Ketu cycles that are the continual rebalancing of our karmic trajectory. Ketu, the life we came into this world knowing from previous incarnations, and Rahu, the life we reach into the next incarnation. Ketu, the sense of our vehicle and base, and Rahu, the hunger to experience our dharma. In this process, we continually reorient and shed our skin like a serpent as we coil around the pathway of our existence. As without, so within. Rahu and Ketu not only do this within us, but also to reality itself in the eclipse cycles. Times of imbalance, when all that must go and be finished is excreted through Ketu, and all that must become and manifest enters through Rahu. Some of what is extracted refreshes us, and some drains us, as in a sauna or fever sweat. Some of what we intake nourishes us, and some toxifies us, as in a feast or bacchanal. Learning to balance Rahu and Ketu's influence with us, as well as navigating their storms when the gateways open and they come to visit, reduces the risk of getting in over our heads, as Rahu offers exponential more and Ketu threatens to pull resources away. If mastered, the two nodes offer instead a continual cleaning system to both your body, spirit, psychological health, and experience of life and success. They offer more without happiness, or less without happiness, but being between them in the eye of their storms of fortune, poison, pleasure, abstinence, indulgence, and introspection is intrinsic to ascending the mountain in the center of the ocean, raising the Kundalini, or climbing the alchemical ladder. So the nodes offer the opportunity for karmic remediation and spiritual ascension, attainment of the light of consciousness. And by being the powers that wield this light, they can also blind by it, so that you can no longer see the world. They cover the sun with their shadow so that you can see behind the mind, and cover the moon so that you can see beyond the body and emotions, temporarily imbibing in us the Sibylline abilities of a blind oracle at Delphi or Dodona. In our daily life, this blindness can be problematic and leads to much of the confusion and chaos that reign during eclipse periods. In astrology, both the literal and metaphorical can as easily manifest, so blindness of cognition and emotion in the various areas of life as the eclipse point appears in your nativities coincides with the potential for actual eye injury and general imbalances in the body, mind, and experience. In the North Node, be in your second house, you may receive more gifts than you want or promotion you cannot handle. In the 11th house, more social opportunities than you can schedule. In the 12th house, more alone time than is healthy, and so on. Between and around eclipses, make sure to not make quick decisions. Think before you seize or accept sudden opportunities, and do not rashly banish things from your life, but securely and consciously let things go that have expired. If some of these decisions can wait for later, utilize this time to consider them and act on them in the time following the eclipse season when you have perspective. That is, until the next regular non-eclipse lunation occurs. Aside from the general perspective of meditating on the node's nature with intent to keep yourself in balance, there are a few techniques from tradition that can help stabilize your system during an eclipse season. While meditating on Rahu, wear black and blue, as it is in accordance with Rahu's colors and the nature of Mount Mardara and the center point of creation. If meditating on Ketu, wear brown and gray. Burn either a blue candle for Rahu or a brown candle for Ketu. Offer flowers and incense. Face north for Rahu and south for Ketu, so that you can be directed toward them when you address them, as well as be antipathetic to their negative influences. North is also the direction of the holy mountain in most ancient traditions, again stressing the orientation to the center. This can be considered the circumpolar center of the axis of the Earth's rotation. Facing south allows one to witness the celestial sky moving westward, the land of the dead and transgressing out of manifestation. Rahu is pleased by the calamus root. You may offer some to Rahu, may ingest a tea of it, or use an essential oil to anoint yourself in ritual objects dedicated to Rahu. Calamus is then used widely to calm the stomach and reduce anxiety. This can easily associate Rahu's effects of insatiable hunger and restlessness. Take care to not ingest too much, as it can lead to vomiting. For Ketu, call upon ashwagandha or skullcap. Rahu delights in the hessionite stone, which is a certain red garnet. Having some present may stabilize your connection to his virtue. Ketu enjoys chrysoberyl, cat's eye stone. During a period of ritual propitiation to Rahu, feed birds in your area, as the overabundance of hunger brought on by Rahu may be somewhat assuaged by this act. For Ketu, feed or do kind things for dogs, like volunteering or donating to a shelter, as dogs congregate around holy temples and cremation grounds. Tradition has it that you may repeat Rahu or Ketu Bij mantra or other Rahu Ketu mantras 18,000 times in 40 days leading up to an eclipse. That's just over 4 repetitions of rosary each day, or repeating mantras 108 times, 4 times a day. Now that we are in the eclipse season, you might want to just repeat the mantras 108 times for Rahu on Wednesday and 108 times on Thursday for Ketu. Rahu's day corresponds to Mercury's day astrologically, and Ketu's day corresponds to Jupiter's day. Both might be helpful with dealing with the imbalances and effects of the eclipses, Jupiter bringing coherence, and Mercury bringing much-needed organization to help filter their influences. Once again, I would like to welcome back to the show my co-host Bonnie.
Good afternoon. Today we have Grant Corum with us. Hi, Grant.
Hello.
Yeah, Grant Corum, you may know from The Million Brazilians, from his label Psychic Sounds, his solo performances as Beguiling Isles, and now as The Orchardist. And what do you call your printing company?
I mean, I just kind of work under just general press. I don't know. I don't really have much of a. I guess just like my last name is a graphic designer. You know?
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
That is like the Plains of Corum or something.
What are you working on now as far as that?
Right now, just finishing up printing some cover art for the Divine Horseman reissue by Maya Deren, which is
cool.
It's very interesting. Like old wire recordings from I think like 54 that were done when Maya Deren went down to Haiti to explore and document some of the voodoo ceremonies, and then actually ended up becoming initiated into it.
Wow.
From there.
Yeah, very cool. And so are you putting that out, or is that...
Yeah, we are. We're
awesome.
Psychic Sounds. Yep.
Yeah, I'd like to look at the dates and see what the astrology was for the time when she was doing that work, and then what time, if it relates to now as it's coming out.
You're such a whore for numbers.
I know, yeah. Any dates, I go crazy. If I'm like, oh, really? Something from the past is coming back? Let's look at the astrology. But that's how you find cool connections, and
absolutely.
you learn more about what the planetary expressions do,
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Very cool. And then and what about music?
Music is been focused, as you mentioned, on the Orchardist, which is some further explorations in like sampling and textures, like homemade, inspired by like the garden and the ocean around here, and kind of finding more expansive terrains as a musical language too.
Yeah, I love because I know you're into exotica as we are, and I love that transportive nature where you're like, okay, this is the locality, and let's just create a portal to that with this sound,
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I was like that, kind of getting outside of, like, beyond like the terrestrial or sweeps of consciousness, like beyond the human, and kind of trying to figure out like a mutational leap into a being of like a new species, or it's like,
yeah, really cool to do right now to focus on what's right around you, the nature that's right around you. Is Saturn and Capricorn is very much about kind of building kind of prison structures or building fortress structures, whichever way you feel like you're oriented within them, but just the very the hard structure of where you're at, the hardness of the trees and the roots in the ground and the bedrock underneath, and like how the barrier between water and land, and there's a lot, especially in Maine where we all are. There's a lot of like the bold coast, and like there's a lot of beaches that aren't they're not sandy beaches, they're rocky beaches, so you can really get in, in like the granite mountains and things like this. You can really get into like the hardness of the nature, especially with the deepness of the winters.
Yeah.
But then when spring comes, it's incredibly lush here.
Glorious.
Yeah, there's like little neon caterpillars and pretty wild little eels caught up in the rocks.
Yeah. Yeah. So you're going to be doing some of that live this week?
Yeah, tomorrow actually.
Which will be after this airs, so
Unfortunately, yeah.
people can look back.
Yeah. I'm excited to. I mean, I guess that's like Thursday. Is that Jupiter's day?
Mm-hmm, yeah. Jupiter day and moon night.
Yeah.
I was kind of hoping Jupiter could help get more explorative and expansive tomorrow,
Yeah.
Yeah, and Jupiter is in Scorpio right now, so it's going to be pulling up stuff that's like more hidden, more kind of from the substructure of things, from things that are maybe fearful or painful, the occult, the sexual, the like covert, the manipulative. But that's all is to say that it's because Scorpio is like about intensity. It's about intense engagement. So that can be, when you're in a, trying to mortally wound someone and they're trying to defend themselves, or, predator prey, or sexual, or in like witchcraft, or, like all these topics. But so, you can find some dark hidden from the colloids of the underground springs.
Yeah.
And just pure Jupiter too. But yeah, sounds good. Do you feel like the Saturn and Capricorn stuff has been, do you feel like there's like a structure of routines, that are affecting your philosophy or your communication style or your aesthetic with your approach to the art you're making right now? Can you feel this like super Saturn that we're in?
I think so. I mean, in a certain sense, and I mean, part of it too is probably the winter, like kind of the cold and dry associated with Saturn. It's kind of like being inside the cube.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
But then also, like, I think a lot about like the rings of limitation, like the actual rings of Saturn, but also kind of like it in this like prison way, and kind of like idea of like discipline and responsibility also, maybe. Just
Yeah.
kinda,
Yeah, and then if you think, I was thinking about that the other day, like the rings of Saturn confining the planet, but also maybe protecting the planet, because that's like meteors flying around, like, and then the rings of a tree, that like is also very Saturnian, that every year there's new growth and age. Yeah, and you look across this catalog of age, and it's like the tree becomes larger and firmer every year.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's like also like a knowledge maybe of mysterious orbit.
Yeah, that's cool. That's interesting that you say that, because that's with Pluto in Capricorn right now too, and Pluto has like a really bizarre orbit. It's shaped strangely. It's at the very edge of our solar system. Pluto is very much just about mystery, what like can't be known, what's beyond us, our comprehension. Yeah, and so Saturn is there, kind of in cahoots with Pluto. So they're kind of in each other's. Pluto's in Saturn's house, but Pluto's like formidable in itself, and there's maybe this a look into the structure of the mysterious orbit, which is interesting.
Yeah, I've been I had like a lucid dream a few years ago too, like in the early afternoon. Like I could see this like strange cloudy terrain with these like this angle coming down on these Roman pillars, and above it was these floating cubes. It felt like the cubes were almost doorways to other dimensions. At least that was the impression. And so I've since like had this cube UFO that pops in and out of drawings and paintings. I recently found this book called The Cult of the Black Cube by Arthur Morris, overviewing like the worship and gnosis of the Saturn deity. And that's been like interesting just to explore. Like it's I guess designed more for occult practice, but it's really insightful just on the background of Saturn and discussing ideas about the black cube's association with it. And so I feel like that's been an element or a symbol that's been popping up and been interesting to investigate.
Yeah, and that came out this year, right?
Yeah, just this last year. Yep.
Yeah, it's interesting that Game of Saturn came out, and that came out, and then the new Twin Peaks with like the black cube in there, and then a lot of works and concentration on Saturnian things even before Saturn went into Capricorn. But as I mentioned before in the show, there's that
it's getting ready for the new guest,
Yeah, getting ready for the new guest. Yeah.
Yeah.
And there's that antitial line, because it's the solstice line, where Saturn, there's the mirroring effect from degrees in Sagittarius to degrees in Capricorn. So it's like one of the times you're, before Capricorn and before Cancer, before Libra and before Aries, you're going to get these kind of preview periods where things are kind of in mirror form before it becomes a reality. And that's, books and television are pretty perfect mirrors to, when things actually get real. And like now that, like you said, it's winter, so it's easy to feel Saturn. It's like, it's happening to our bodies. But, over the last spring and over the summer, we were looking at these fascinating new Saturn books and watching the Black Cube, watching Cooper and the Black Cube,
Yeah, it's strange how that does pop up in like, it's kind of like a symbol of alien menace or some kind of alternate, like, contemporary art and media. It's like, Hellraiser's puzzle box, or like,
right,
even like Michael Jackson's last record, I think a couple years ago, called Escape. It's like he's got this like real fashionable outfit on him where looks like he's imprisoned within it, like with these Saturn rings.
Yeah, and it's interesting too that this is like the end of this material period. I keep talking about those Saturn-Jupiter conjunctions, and I know, I don't know if you're comfortable talking about your chart, but I know you're born in 1981, right?
Yes.
Yeah, and that's you're part of the group of people who have the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction in an air sign before the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction in air sign 200-year epoch occurs. So everyone out there born in 1981 has, either it like co-present or really conjunct, and there's something about this generation of people, the 1981 people, who are in some way going to play, many of them are going to have to step up to play some role when we enter this new epoch. They're like, it's those people who are like already wired to a degree to deal with this shift into air signs and out of materiality, which I'm really interested to see how that plays out.
It's like all your hard work that you've been doing, Grant, is going to pay off.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
All right. Yeah.
I mean, not like it hasn't paid off already, you know, but it's like sometimes, you know, just thinking about like how you're doing something and you think you're doing it for this reason, but then like this like other greater reason comes into play.
Yeah, like it's all leading to something, to this thing that's going to be part of a greater historical narrative or story.
That's interesting. I mean, I've been thinking more about like, you know, the idea of responsibility of the artist, and you know, Ursula Le Guin just passed away, and I know that she talks, you know, she goes into a bit of detail about that. And I was reading like how she was saying how like resistance and change often begin in art, and, you know, just kind of meditating on that idea.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. Like in the last forecast, I wrote a lot about the apocalypse and Judgment Day, but it being, I think it was a meditation upon this epoch shift, that every 200 years you get this element shift, and it's a really traditional and firm and established way to astrologically track big shifts and periods in history, and that every time this occurs, it is sort of like an apocalypse and a Judgment Day. As like apocalypse just means like a revealing. That's why we get revelations, you know, and that it's like at the end of these epochs, it's kind of like the lid is pulled off, and it's like, okay, check it out. Here's everything we did right and everything we did wrong, and now we have to decide which direction we're going to go. And it's that like we have to make judgments. So it is like Judgment Day, essentially, you know?
Yeah.
Not that we're being judged by a higher order, but in a way we are, especially this time, because nature itself is like, what are you doing? Are you going to keep doing this? You know?
Yeah.
But yeah, very interesting. Yeah, because I know we had spoke about, you know, as someone who prints and releases records and stuff, you know, like where that, how we all change feet as we go into the next phase, you know?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the idea of like, yes, material objects, especially something that's so more ethereal, like music, like in the exchange of music and where it's gone. Like, is that kind of what you were talking about with like that conversation? Or
yeah, it's been something I've been thinking about too. Yeah, like so it's like we're so used to our whole lives, like as people who've listened to LPs and collected records and put out records, to now be like, okay, well, we make music, and music is definitely, it's one of the things with being a hunter-gatherer, or even astrologizing, that goes back into the vanishing point of human behavior, you know, where like music stays, but maybe these mediums change, you know?
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, yeah, definitely like records are such like a fetish object, you know. People like to be able to like look at them and touch them and like make collections and like, you know, create essentially like record stores that are in a way like curated galleries. So
yeah,
it's I mean, it's like a, you know, book, you know, it's like when books and like the whole like the incoming technology of being able to read books off of pads and things like that, like it's just kind of like people begin to question where the like the materialistic part. But I think it's important to have a physical record also.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I mean, records are amazing. I mean, they spin, you know. So right there, they have like theurgical power, you know.
Yeah.
But yeah, you know, like I don't know if it is at all. They're one of the more toxic things you could make. Like is like I wonder if people are going to start being like, okay, we want to keep these, so how do we make them with different materials and make them in a different process? It's obviously possible, you know, it's just an expensive project, you know.
Well, fashion is said to be like the second most polluting industry in the world, the first being the oil industry. So, you know, that, and I think that fashion, it's records are so wrapped up in fashion, and you know, where are we going to bring this because it has to continue in some way. But
yeah,
you know,
fashion is, they're making efforts. That's like they're like, oh no, we need to do something, right?
Yeah, some people, and then others are just like, whatever, we're the kings and queens, and I feel like that's all being taken down.
Yeah.
In a way, slowly, that foundation is eroding.
Yeah, and probably more quickly than it's like that.
Well, yeah, it's been happening slowly, and now it's like really like happening quite faster.
Yeah, and that's something with like Capricorn, Saturn and Capricorn is like, it's like time to pay the piper, like it's like,
you didn't see this coming. Like,
yeah. People are going to get rewarded for working really hard, and then people are going to get locked up for being wretched, which I thought was really interesting with like the wear black and supportive times up, just as like Saturn's color is black and Saturn rules time, and it's a pretty like clear, it's a pretty clear signature of, and I love it because I've talked a lot about female incarnations of Saturn and the possibility of Saturn being maybe primarily male, but also female, the way most of the other planets get that, because they have like a kind of like a day domicile and a night domicile, like a yin domicile and a yang domicile. And Saturn in Capricorn is in his female domicile because it's a earth sign. And so we always look at Capricorn and Saturn as like, that's the CEO of the company, that's like the top dog. But I think in this case, it's one of the roles it's going to play is like, okay, this is what the earth wants to do because we're ending this material epoch and it's time to kind of like check out, everyone has to return their books back to the library now or else they're going to get like tracked down,
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. What, I was curious, Bonnie, like what, exactly as far as the fashion industry being a high pollutant, like what is it that defines that, or how, like, what is it that, is it just a lot of waste of the material, or what, how does that?
Definitely. I think there's a lot of problems with the dyes being used, production in general. Though, I mean, most things are made elsewhere.
Isn't it a lot of the laundering the garments too, or the?
There's so much water being used that there's definitely. I read about 2 women in a Scandinavian country who were working with some sort of fungus to create waterless washing. Which is great.
Speaking of fashion, can you talk about the what's going on with Alexander Wang?
Yeah, and also speaking of that kind of the eroding of the pedestal that these gods and goddesses of fashion have been made for themselves and then have stood on for way too long. There we have Alexander Wang, who has changed. He's taking himself out of Fashion Week, or his whole group. Wang Fest, as he likes to call it, is going to be moved.
Whoa.
Yeah, I know, right? It's going to be moved.
That's like the video that Stefan sent, that like Langham Mania.
Yeah, totally. It's different. So it's going to be. That's our other guest.
This is the guest that's normally silent.
ZZ, yeah. It's going to be moved from February and September to June and December.
Which I find really interesting because that moves it to, it's kind of askew a little bit, but it moves it to the to Capricorn Cancer axis, to the solstice axis seas, and so. With Saturn and Capricorn, you have all this, like, Saturn is gravity and weight and what's heavy, and so you have this like heavy spike pulling that solstice point down, especially as his entry into Capricorn was right at the solstice, right as the sun went into the solstice, right into Capricorn, and it's a pretty dramatic transition. And then I noted that the first day of 2018 was a full moon in Cancer, so 2018 has this Cancerian signature too. So you get both ends. You get like the summer solstice and the winter solstice, and then that's the sort of the points that the fashion. What are they? How we express that? The fashion, the runway.
Yeah.
Episodes are
shows.
gravitating towards
the collections are shown.
Yeah, the collections are gravitating towards the solstice points, and just even in Alexander Wang, like restructuring his strategy. That's what I've been telling all my clients recently. It's a time to restructure your strategy based on where Capricorn is in your chart.
Yeah, and also that makes it so that they're only showing twice a year, whereas before there were so many shows. There's pre-fall and pre-spring and all these shows, and it was just kind of, I think, really destroying these designers, their creativity and their ability to create things that are fresh and exciting. It was it just became a machine, which
you kind of saw in Phantom Thread that just came out.
Absolutely.
Which is like, it was very Virgo-ish, but definitely also very Saturnian portrait. It's Daniel Day-Lewis's last role. He's more of a, it's his oldest role. If this is truly his last role, he's the oldest gentleman he's going to portray, and it's about his like extreme structure and being overburdened by his role of leading a house.
I don't remember where I read it, but I read some fashion writer's review or mention of that movie, and she said that it almost was like a comedy or a satire of the fashion industry to people who are in the fashion industry because of that, the portrayal of just such a busy lifestyle without any room for love and for things outside of work. Contacts with humans. True contact.
Yeah, you're just in the structure.
Yeah. I have yet to see that one, but I was curious about it with like the sewing of the hidden messages in the clothing.
Yeah, I know, it's so good. Yeah.
I know. I mean, kind of on that same level of like it being a little bit of a cartoon, like real life. Like, I wanted to see that new like series on what is the Branch Davidian cult, like in the Waco.
I didn't know. I don't know about that yet.
I heard about it on the radio the other day, and it sounded pretty interesting. But they were having like reporters that had been there originally coming on there and basically being like, "Yeah, this is all very dramatized, It wasn't really like this, or it was like that, or not like that." And it tends to happen, but I suppose it's up to the people to do their own research after getting excited about it or something.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I think in general, I wrote that in this forecast for sure. It's time for people to like focus on the reality check and check your work, like as you go, be like, check your work before you submit it. I was really seeing that in the, we have the Sun and Venus in Aquarius, and so I ran through this in the beginning of the forecast, but our identities and the vision of our identities and in the fringes, and then like our like Venus, like pleasure and aesthetics, like our ideas of aesthetics and beauty are like looking out to the frontiers for inspiration and for a better picture of like who we can be, and what we used to call like alternative lifestyles like 10 years ago. That's like an offensive, wretched term now, like it's just like, this is just people, everyone just has their lifestyle,
Right.
And then Jupiter pulling opportunities out of pain and out of what's hidden and what's been like what's been suppressed, and then Mars just entering Sagittarius is like, in Sagittarius is very like motivation oriented and like to drive towards like a target. So when you get Mercury there, it's possible, propaganda is possible. When you get Venus is there, it's like infectious tastes. But with Mars there, it's just kind of like anything that is an opportunity. It's just like, let's put it right in the gas tank. Let's take action. So they're in each other's signs, Mars and Jupiter. And so Jupiter's kind of like, check out this like hidden, painful thing that's an opportunity to do something good with. And Mars is like, oh yeah, let's like, he just runs up with a bat and hits it.
Whack-a-mole.
Yeah, it's like
ask no questions.
Yeah, and so people are jumping into conclusions and to push their own agenda or whatever their like pet agenda is, and or a political kind of like prescription. But it's like the one of the few times you're like, but luckily Saturn's in Capricorn, you know, like being like, okay, everyone check their work. Let's like, this all has to check out to be real before we go nuts with this, you know, like it all has to ultimately hit the Saturn machine before it can be used. Which Bonnie showed me a skit that was on Saturday Night Live recently. Was that just last week? Mm-hmm. And they finally kind of touch on the Me Too movement and, you know, in the aftermath of like that attitude that's sinking in now, you know, it really described that whole formation, you know, that whole configuration of planets, exactly kind of where they're at right now. And I looked into Saturday Night Live's natal chart itself, which is interesting that, and they have Saturn in Leo, and the moon in Capricorn, so it kind of highlights this particular eclipse cycle and the kind of the moon emotional, like this emotion of the structure, the Capricornian structure, and it's right on 19 degrees, which is where we have Pluto. So they're in that story, you know, like they're in that story that's coming back around now. So it's really interesting that like in our age where news is dodgy, you know, and I know even fake news is something that's like cliche to say now, but that you're like, everyone's kind of waiting to be like, well, what does SNL have to say about it?
Well, but you didn't mention that in, you know, the details of the skit where it's just 6 people out to dinner and they bring up a celebrity. They, you know, one woman asked, well, what do you think about the alleged acts of this celebrity? And everyone's afraid to say anything. And, you know, the whole thing is that people start to try to address it, and then everyone's like, careful, and it's not, and people aren't, it's just too hot to touch. Like, people just like feel like they can't talk about it, which I think is going to be difficult in getting any kind of solution if you can't discuss it.
Yeah, eventually things have to be said out loud to be processed, you know, like someone who's really in the really has their ideas all mixed up often has to hear themselves out loud, you know, to like be able to understand themselves and understand what they're trying to say.
But I guess the fear is just being crucified for saying the wrong thing.
Yeah, but you know, we're not expressing our opinions here. We're just
certainly
showing
not.
It like really fits all the planetary placements, which is fascinating, and then how Saturday Night Live fits the Pluto degree in Capricorn, which it's really interesting to have it come all the way back around, you know, or it's the moon on the Pluto degree, and so like we were saying about like if you're from 1981. If you were born in 1981, something in your life is gonna spearhead into this shift of epoch, this air epoch story. And then people born in 1982 who have Saturn and Pluto conjunct, last time they were conjunct, you're gonna be like brought into this, in a couple of years' time, brought into this Saturn-Pluto conjunction story, you know? And so SNL kind of like, it's brought into this, and we can see how it already functions, you know? It's like, we almost need the satirist more than we need the reporter, you know, which is really interesting.
What were you going to say? Oh.
Get some good satirists on the horizon here.
Yeah, yeah. We need the Saturnists.
Yeah. What were you going to say about John Galliano?
Oh, I was just looking into John Galliano. How do you say it? Like Misson Magiella?
Something like that.
Yeah, like I think people know what I'm talking about. The who he's designing for now. What just came down the runway, they were saying it's like he does it all for Instagram. It's like a really, really focused on like nowness, you know, which often can be fresh, but right now it's like really pointing out like kind of how mixed up and ugly things are, you know.
But do you know that those clothes, they looked a certain way, but then when you took with flash photography and you put it, when you looked through your phone, it looked like another way.
Yeah, and that's part of the nowness of it. It's like playing with the instantness of the looks. But it really reminded me of the Aquarius Leo axis, you know, just taking like let's take all the, it looked very Aquarian, like let's take all this like fringy looking stuff. I don't mean like fringe like a
no fringe there.
Yeah, I don't mean that kind of fringe, but like all this stuff from the like all these hidden little corners everywhere outside the central, and then let's take it and literally put it on the runway under the spotlight, and then like flash lights at it, you know, and make it like central.
Yeah, it's like underwater. I've been watching a lot of deep sea underwater explorations. Kind of reminds me of Investigations and Strange Nooks, and I don't know why.
That's really great. That's really great, like Jupiter and Scorpio stuff too, because sometimes we forget that Scorpio is a water sign, you know.
Yeah,
it's like the monsters of the deep, you know, the mutants. So do you have travel plans coming up?
Well, yeah. Just found out this last week I'm gonna be headed like through northeast through the Midwest, down to the Southwest, and then up along the west, and then back across again in the U.S. Play some sounds along the way and see some friends.
And that's going to be the Orchardist?
Yeah, I feel like I'll take that one out, and I'm going to be joined by a couple of folks along the way here and there. This performer from Santiago, Chile, who goes by Ambassador Dalgoon, and then Idaho Joe Winslow from the Bay Area is going to join me for a little bit too. He's like a instrument maker and confessionalist, like songwriter.
Confessionalist. Yeah, I guess that's very Saturn and Capricorn. It's time to like confess, you know, like you're before the judge, you know.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, well, we'll put whatever links you want to submit in the comments. I'm realizing I did want to mention because we're between these eclipse periods that it's really, I dug up something kind of interesting with the eclipse that we just had. Last show I talked a lot about how it was Saros Series 124, and I just looked this time at just like eclipse, the last time an eclipse occurred on the same degree, which was a different Saros series. It was 114, which is the same series we had in February 11th of 2017, which was the first Leo Aquarius eclipse of this of that axis in those pair of signs. And that's right when the formation of Trump's cabinet was coming together, and there was all these evacuations during that one all over the world. There was 70,000 people were evacuated in Greece as they attempted to defuse a World War II era unexploded ordnance they found, like some sort of mine. And mass evacuations in the NorCal spillway and the Australian bushfires, which is really interesting for now, as it's like these themes of kind of you know, how are we gonna like society really feels like we need to get the bomb squad in here and just like disarm this thing, you know.
Yeah.
But that like on that eclipse in January of 1999 was there was an ice storm in DC that shut down the city, and then we had the government shut down, you know.
We're probably heading for another.
Yeah. And then also that was when Clinton gave the State of the Union address while he was there was an impending impeachment trial, and he didn't mention it during the address.
Naturally.
But, yeah. But that was for the Paula Jones and Monica Lewinsky stuff. So it's like the same kind of themes, you know, like wanting, you know, people thinking the president should be impeached because of sexual conduct, you know. Mm-hmm. And like him not talking about it while he's giving the address. So that's really interesting. And that has to do with like eclipses occurring on that degree, even though they're part of different Saros series, which is really...
I'm not 100% sure about this, but I think that those two both gave the longest State of the Union addresses in the history of that address, which is funny because they're like not mentioning, you know, they're like spending time kind
not
of...
mentioning stuff.
Not mentioning, yeah. They did spend a little extra time.
But it makes sense because it's Saturn and, or at least this time around, Saturn and Capricorn, like long, you know.
Yeah. 80 minutes. 80 to 90 minutes.
Yeah, I just wanted
interesting.
to go over those. They're pretty interesting. I love the eclipse stuff is so interesting to me.
Yeah, you talk about like how with the eclipses, like you're talking about the dragon.
Yeah.
That's a pretty interesting notion, kind of the idea of how do you say it, the dragon of the deep or something of the stars. Like,
Yeah, well, it's like the chthonic dragon split into two, which is kind of, it's the same as the Ouroboros, but it's just a different way to look at it, you know? One is on either end of kind of where we are, and it's its motion that cycles through us that brings things from the invisible realm into the manifest realm. It causes the change in our life. It's kind of where the north node is and where the south node is. We like kind of look away from the south node area and look towards the north node area, and that south node area is going to drain and then fill back up with new life and new circumstance. But it takes we have to like continually let some water out to put some water in,
Yeah.
And so it's like that, and it's that chthonic water. It's coming from that like primordial kind of genesis.
Oh yeah. Yeah, it seems very like Typhonian.
Yeah,
like,
totally.
Fun.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So,
I was curious too. A year ago, like kind of speaking of things lining up, like I remember last year there was some observatory in Belgium that found like on the 22nd of February the TRAPPIST system, and I was curious, have you in your studies come across like any way of how like maybe that ties in at all to like this, or is that completely like distanced, or is it too fresh to even know at this moment? Or
yeah, I think sometimes it's too fresh. Sometimes it's like, okay, I mean, we can certainly look at it and then take that date and look back into time and see if it's on some sort of rhythm or see what kind of configuration lined up with it. But then when in interpreting new systems and new things they find, you often have to wait to see kind of what they're going to do. They go into like, it's like a time to start observing their effects,
Yeah.
But yeah, I think this brings us to the end of our conversation.
Now it's time.
Yeah, the time's up.
Yeah, time's up. No.
Well, thanks very much, Grant.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, thanks for.
Thank you for listening to Liminal Light. Our theme music was composed by the ever-talented Asa Irons. Our guest today was Grant Corum, designer, printer, musician, and the entity behind the Psychic Sounds label. Find his work at psychicsounds.com. I'm your host, Chrissy Puchere Rapucci, and you can find me at atavisceral.com. atavisceral.com, where I post articles and forecasts, offer chart readings, talismanic concoctions, occult services, tarot, divination, and more.